think it's very hard and very difficult to put your life under a microscope and put it down on paper when you know that you've made bad decisions. I shot and killed a drug dealer.
Welcome to Wrong Speak, the podcast about the things we believe to be true but cannot say. I'm Jonathan Kay. Several years ago, a lawyer friend approached me here in Toronto with a story. His longtime client was being released from prison after decades of incarceration. Would I be interested in meeting him and reading the book manuscript he'd written behind bars? That ex-prisoner was Edward Hertrich, a drug dealer who grew up poor in downtown Toronto, killed another criminal, and spent 35 years behind bars as a result. Not surprisingly, Eddie, as he's known to everyone, had a lot of interesting stories about his life in crime, his years in prison, and the strategies he's used to live an honest life on the outside. In time, several of those stories were printed in the magazine I once edited. And now his full tale is being published in a new book from Dundurn Press entitled Wasted Time. In anticipation of that book's publication, I spoke with Eddie for Wrong Speak at the Dundurn offices in Toronto. Here are excerpts from our conversation. A lot of the people you describe in this book are criminals or former criminals. How do you think they're going to react to the publication of this book?
I tried to disseminate my copy of the original manuscript to as many people that are mentioned in the book, although I did use aliases to protect them. They had various opinions of it, although most enjoyed the book. We view things differently. You and I would view the same circumstance differently. They believe I told the truth in most cases.
A lot of the people you describe in the book are dead.
Absolutely.
Is this common in the criminal world where people don't make it to old age or even middle age?
The harsh reality of a criminal lifestyle is many will not live long, whether it be on the streets when they're involved in the crime or when they're serving sentence.
As you researched this book and reconnected with some of the people who you used to know back in your criminal days, it sounds like you discovered that a lot of them are in a bad way. They're sick, assuming they're still alive, or they're impoverished. That must have been a very sad thing to discover.
They're not affluent people. None of them have been successful. I'm very happy that they're still with us today, compared to the people that didn't make it that I knew, and I've lost hundreds of friends.
In the book, you describe how an older brother played a key role in bringing you into a life of crime originally. Do you still have anger about that?
I had a petty criminal lifestyle beginning before I went on board with my brother, my oldest brother. It was my decision to make at the time, although I feel there was a lot of influences in joining him. I was 17 and he was 30. But, and a lot of people harbored ill will towards him for bringing me into the fold with him in a major distribution, drug trafficking. There have been times where I harbored ill will, and there's times where I accepted the fact that I made that decision.
Just as you were brought into a life of crime by others, were there people who you think you influenced negatively and brought them into a life of crime?
No. Absolutely not. I think all the people that I associated with were already criminals in their lifestyle, and I worked with. I can't think of anyone that I actually mentored and brought into a criminal lifestyle with me.
The person you killed and some of the other victims of your violent acts that you describe were other criminals. They weren't simply regular civilians.
Absolutely.
Do you find that makes a difference morally when you describe your past to people? Do they make a moral distinction between acts of violence against other criminals and against random ordinary people?
It does matter a great deal to the criminal circles that I traveled in. I shot and killed a drug dealer and a person involved in the criminal lifestyle. I am looked upon differently than somebody that went into a bank and shot a teller, a mother of some children that is just there doing her job.
Given your past, do you find that people sometimes don't feel safe around you? Or can they contextualize your past and understand that it was a product of the kind of life you were in then and know that your life now is different from that?
People that know me and are around me and have met me are very comfortable with me. They feel safe. They feel secure. I would like to add, though, that, when you say the victim's different, and that was my thought for many years in the penitentiary, and there came a time where I realized that when you commit violence on somebody, they're not the only victim. Everybody has family, they have friends, and they are affected by the violence that is placed upon the person that they know and love.
How did your criminal lifestyle affect the other people in your family?
I'm the 10th of 11 children, other than my older brother and myself. The rest are all law-abiding, upstanding citizens who we broke trust with and we let down. And quite frankly, they should be ashamed of what we did back then. Trust is something that once broken, you really have to work at it. I've been home almost 5 years now. I still try to maintain a higher level of trust than I have with every one of them, with yourself, with society.
How difficult is it to get a job or even a place to live when you've served time for violent criminal acts?
Employment is very difficult when you have a criminal record. That's one of the biggest setbacks with having a criminal record. Although it's law now, they can't ask you if you have a criminal record. Pretty much every employer has on their application, can we do a security check on you?
And I guess because of Google, it's easy for people to find out exactly what you did.
Oh yes, my employer now knows who I am. The employer I had before this employer knew who I was. However, I got let go by the employer before that as soon as they found out my criminal background. Employment is gained by who you know, not by your own merits once you have a criminal record.
Of the people who serve time in prison, many are going to come out and try to start honest lives. Is there a mutual support network among that group of people who are looking out for each other and trying to find each other places to live and jobs and connections and that sort of thing?
They can't afford to. There's a great many prisoners that come out with the hope of getting back onto a proper path, but they're not given the opportunities because of their past, and they become impatient, disenchanted, and they return to their criminal lifestyles.
What do you think about the halfway house system that we have here in Canada?
It's helpful in the fact that it provides accommodation, a place to stay for somebody coming out of prison that doesn't have family, doesn't have any outside support. Does it help the person that has a family, has a home to go to? Not so much. I mean, it's a safety valve for society. They know where he is and what he's doing each day.
There's a debate in Canada and other countries about whether solitary confinement in prison constitutes a form of torture. Did you ever endure solitary confinement when you were in prison?
I've been in solitary confinement in a lot of institutions. I had a friend that was put in a hospital and he was in pain, and I had acquired some painkillers that I put in a canteen bag to give to him to help him out, and the guard discovered them, and I spent time in the hole for that. There was a knife found in my cell when I first went to Millhaven, and I was placed in the hole for that. There was an inmate assaulted for stealing out of other inmates' cells, and at that time, I was placed in what they called administrative seg, which was basically solitary confinement. And I was housed there for probably close to 5 months, which is probably the only time that I ever really experienced a form of becoming stir crazy. 23 and a half hour lockup a day with a half hour of yard.
What do you mean by stir crazy?
You start to lose focus. Your mind starts, after, I would say, 4.5 months, my mind started going, I don't know how to describe it.
Did you have access to books or TV or anything like that?
I had no books. I had no radio. The radio did not work in the cell. The security officers misplaced my television. So I had no TV. The window was filthy dirty in the cell, so you couldn't breathe out of it. You couldn't open it. You couldn't see through it. It was not a good place to be. That was at Millhaven Institution.
So in the final analysis, do you think that solitary confinement is something that should be avoided by prisons, except in extreme circumstances?
I believe that if you're in prison, and I've always taken responsibility for my actions, and if I do something wrong and I should be punished for it, then, if you have to put me in the hole, then 15 days, 30 days, whatever the degree of punishment is, to curb that behavior in the future. However, once you start getting past 30 days, you're starting to become torture instead of punishment.
When you got out of prison for the last time in 2014, you were entering a world that had iPhones and tablets and all sorts of digital technology that you must have been unfamiliar with. Is that right?
I went to prison the last time in 2003. I am not at all familiar with technology, computers. They have computers inside, but no internet, so you can type on a computer. I wrote my story inside before I came home.
That must have been frustrating for you.
It's frustrating, definitely, because it's a form of communication that you can't deal with. It's like everybody's talking a different language that you want to talk to them, but you can't because you don't know how.
You grew up in the Regent Park neighborhood of downtown Toronto, fairly poor place back in the 1960s when you were a kid. Tell me a little bit about some of the transformations that you see when you revisit it now.
Well, the infrastructure has totally changed. When I returned home in 2014 to the halfway house, I was driven down Regent Street and stopped in front of my St. Bartholomew Street, my old street. And I looked up at the street sign and I looked across from it, and it was like 4 football fields of dirt. There was not one brick from any of the row houses. And I felt like an orphan. My whole childhood had been erased. My house, my street, the streets around it, everything was a football field of dirt. I mentioned in my book that, as a child growing up in Regent, not knowing what was available in the world, I didn't covet anything. I didn't want anything. I was very happy as a child.
Tell me a little bit about how drug culture has changed since you got into selling drugs, I guess, in the 1970s. In the book, you describe selling things like, I think it was hash oil and pot and stuff like that. As I mentioned in my book, I grew up in a time where Cheech and Chong come out, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. Everybody was weed, marijuana, grass was available everywhere. It was new. It was a new commodity. The hard drugs, with the appearance of fentanyl, Oxycontin, those are killing people like flies. It's pretty rare to go to jail for a long time, at least in Canada, and write a book about it. Are you aware of others who have done this, and have they helped shape the way you created your own narrative? Well, I've read the books from Stephen Reed and Roger Caron, different Canadian publishers, Michael MacArthur, Richard Atkinson, and some of them are autobiographies or memoirs. I think it's very hard and very difficult to put your life under a microscope and put it down on paper when you know that you've made bad decisions, and you have to accept it and to let society know that you made those bad decisions. It's difficult. Tell me a little bit about your legal saga, because you were able to get a really good Toronto lawyer, quite famous actually, to represent you.
Before my release, I was having problems gaining my release due to conflict with a security officer at the institution I was at. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but because of my reputation, people on the outside were starting to get a little upset, family, friends, and in particular this lawyer. And when I explained my situation, he came up to represent me at my hearing.
And how did all this come to the lawyer's attention?
He's been my lawyer since I was a child, since my first arrest. And he represented me on my drug trials. He represented me on my initial murder trial. So he has known me since I was very, very young, since I was 16 years old.
He must be thrilled that this book is coming to fruition.
He's so proud of me, and I'm humbled by that. A lot of people in my life are very proud of where I am today compared to where I was at 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old.
There isn't a lot of privacy in prison. What was the attitude of other prisoners who must have known that you were writing this?
I was employed as a cleaner in a neighborhood building that had computers in a living room area. So while all the other prisoners were at their jobs during the day, when I had time off my job, I would sit at one of the computers and write this book. Having said that, when I was at completion of the book, I let a few of the other inmates that were there with me that I had respect for their intellect. I might not have liked them, but I respected their intellect. I had them read over my book to see what they thought. And I got good reviews on it. I even had a couple of staff members look over my book at the institution, and they had good reviews on it.
Those programs where former gang members and criminals come to school to talk to students, have you done that sort of stuff?
I've spoken to high schools. I've spoken at group homes, training schools, colleges, universities, even churches. I personally, for myself, enjoyed the group homes and the training school most because those were the youth at risk. Years later, after I spoke, I encountered young offenders that were later in prison with me, and they told me, "We didn't listen to you, but Joe listened to you, and Pete listened to you." And they became productive members of society and got away from their lifestyle. So that, for me, was very uplifting.
Conrad Black, who was my boss at one point, wrote a book that had several chapters about prison life. Of course, he went to prison in the United States for financial crimes. He described this hierarchy where you have former or current mafia members on top, and then ordinary criminals in the middle, and then at the very bottom you have sex offenders, especially sex offenders against children. Did you encounter that kind of hierarchy?
Definitely. When I first went to prison, I wouldn't say that it was mafioso or a certain gang like that were the top of the institution hierarchy for prisoners. They were men that gained respect, and I myself chaired many committees, and I didn't take office by vote. I took it by acclamation because I represented everybody in the institution. Yes, there's a hierarchy where sexual offenders and predators and jailhouse informants are definitely the lowest form in a prison. When I first went to prison, they were not allowed to mix with normal population. Somewhere in 92, 93, corrections changed that. It was well known to the population. It was well known that if any of them were touched or even yelled at, to quote one warden, you'd be in the hole so long they'd have to pump daylight into you. You would be the one going. So there was some degree of violence, not as much as expected.
Prison life is a popular theme in TV and movies. Do you think the media gets it right when they show scenes that are ostensibly set in prisons?
Sometimes it's comical. I think movies like American Me, with Edward James Olmos, was pretty close to prison life. There are some that are close to prison life.
What about this common idea that rape is common in prison? Sexual assault, every time you drop the soap in the shower, that kind of thing. Is that just myth?
That's not going to happen. In Canadian prisons, and I'm only speaking for the prisons that I was in, when you see men rape another man, we didn't allow that. I think the last man that actually raped a younger man in Millhaven was found behind a handball court with 57 stab wounds.
Is it true that there is a code of honor of sorts among criminals?
I think that, as in the movie Scarface, every criminal I knew loved it when he said, "No women, no kids." You know, you don't victimize them people.
What kind of training and coaching, daily life skills do they teach in prison? And are they useful?
When I initially entered the federal correctional system, the focus by the government was on trades. And what society found was guys were coming out of prison with trades, but they had no social skills. Then the focus shifted to programs because society found that these guys were having problems. So then they cut out the trades and they focused on social skills. Now they're finding that a lot of guys may have social skills, but they have no trade. So they have to find a balance there.
In the United States, the prison system, according to my understanding, tends to be at least informally segregated by race, where blacks and whites and Hispanics tend to stick together in prison. Is it the same situation here in Canada?
I think Canada has progressed a lot to remove the racial barriers. It's still present in a lot of forms, but I think we've made a lot of progress, and I think we still need to make a lot more. I've seen we still have flare-ups between blacks and whites, or blacks and natives, or, you know, we have the Asian culture in prisons now that may come into conflict with the white group or the native group.
So can friendships in prisons go across racial lines?
As I state in my book, when you go to a prison, you know, you gravitate to commonalities. It could be geographical. I mean, for me, I was closest with guys that grew up on my street, grew up on my block, grew up in Regent, and then the east end of Toronto, then Toronto, and then, you know, my circle, as it expanded, got into Hamilton, that kind of area, and commonalities. If you like to play guitar and I play guitar and we're in the music room, we're playing guitar, we can strike up a friendship there. So you gravitate to commonalities. If you're black and I'm black, we would probably find that in common.
What about the English-French divide here in Canada? Does that exhibit itself among prisoners?
The French group, when I first went to prison, pretty much had their own cultural group, and they interacted with everybody else, but really they were seen as the French group.
You're very open about all your experiences in this book. Are there people you know who simply refuse to talk about their criminal days once they're out of prison and in the outside world, and they just completely shut up about that?
Oh, yes, absolutely. They don't want anyone knowing who they are, what they've been through, and that's their prerogative. Sometimes a lot of their families don't know. You know, some of my nephews and nieces didn't know my history until they were mature adults, and it wasn't volunteered to them. They found by accident.
We often talk about PTSD in the context of soldiers. Do you think criminals can get PTSD?
Absolutely. I've seen people with their heads caved open right in front of me. I've seen knives go through people's throats, straight razors go through people's throats right in front of my eyes.
Is there any discussion about PTSD in prisons or in halfway houses?
No. No, but I have encountered, a couple of gentlemen that said that they were going for disabilities for PTSD, which I found humorous because they didn't come close to my length of incarceration or my experiences that I encountered in violence. But that's their prerogative.
Are there therapists that you can see in prison?
There are, but there's a total lack of trust. And if you're seen talking too much to different authority figures, it doesn't instill confidence of your solidarity with other prisoners. You might be telling them something that other prisoners don't want them to know. I was in Millhaven Maximum Institution for 2 years before a guard even talked to me, and I was totally shocked.
This has been really interesting. Thank you so much for speaking with WrongSpeak.
Thank you very much.